Alright folks, so I don't have a whole lot of time for a video these days, but I have more to add to the playlist. I'll leave a link in the description box. I was decoding and talking about Rush 2112, a few planets, a couple of countries, and this had to do with the drummer Neil Peart. If you haven't seen the videos yet, I'll leave links in the description, but a small recap. Neil Peart, the drummer of Rush, wrote the lyrics to and the story of 2112. And this is what kicked this whole thing off for me. I saw his performance at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the bass drum, the face that faces the audience, looked like a clock face, but instead of numbers, it was alchemy symbols. I was suggesting that the clock face, with its time set to what looks like 9/12, is somewhat of a tribute to Neil Peart's birthday, September 12th, 9/12. You can see off to the right there's an analog clock set to 9/12. Off to the left is what you see on the drum head, the bass drum head facing the audience at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Looks like a clock set to 9/12, at least in my opinion. And I thought this was a reference to either his birthday, 9/12, or the song that I was decoding, 2112, because on a clock, 2112 is like 9:12 p.m. Not being a big Rush fan, I mean, I like a few songs on the radio, but I'm not a big Rush fan. I never owned any of their albums or anything. But not being a big Rush fan and not doing the proper research, I guess, what I didn't notice was that clock face on Neil Peart's drum was an obvious reference to their final album, Clockwork Angels. So I did a little bit of research on this, and one of the first things I came to, obviously, was the album cover with the same clock face. It's a different color than was on his drum head, but the alchemy symbols arranged in a clock face, the time was set to the same time. It also led me to something called Clockwork Lives. There was a trilogy of graphic novels that came out in connection with Rush's Clockwork Angels. The drummer, Neil Peart, took part in the writing of at least two of these books, Clockwork Angels and the Clockwork Lives graphic novels, which were definitely connected with the Rush album Clockwork Angels. And the first one that I saw, the book, was this Clockwork Lives. I guess it's book 2, but the cover of it reminded me of this dream that was very strange, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. So you notice off to the left, actually, let me zoom in. Okay, look off to the left. That's the cover of Clockwork Lives graphic novel. There may be different versions of the cover. That's the first one that I came across in connection with the album Clockwork Angels. So notice there is the same alchemy symbols around a circle. Instead of a clock, it is a compass, and in the center of this compass is a bee. Next to the bee, off to the right, you can see a splotch of blood, maybe a couple of little ones, but a big splotch of blood. And this reminded me of this dream that I had back in late May of last year. Luckily, I was able to find out what date it was because I texted my girlfriend about this. And so I texted her on May 30th about this dream that I had the previous night, May 29th, 2023. Remind me later to tell you about the dream about Tim, the queen bee, and the sacrifice. Before I get into the dream, just a little bit of background information. Tim is someone I'd worked with for years. Now, he quit just around the time of that text, May of 2023. And both of us at the time were working 6 and 7 days a week, average about 10 hours a day. He was leaving, and I was to be expected to even put in more hours than I was. So, and also when we first met, the relationship was a bit rocky. The dude talked, him and I got along just fine when he left. But near the beginning, he talked a lot of smack, not just to me, but he was kind of a tough talker, and he just suggested violence. He just talked a lot of violence. I'm not about that. And I'm not about promoting violence. So one day, like a meathead, I basically was like, "You want to talk like that? Let's talk outside and see." I don't want to get into the whole thing, but once basically I said, "We're gonna settle this outside," things settled down and we're fine now. But he quit, and then not long after that, I had this dream. Now, as I said, I was not a big Rush fan. I didn't own anything put out by them until last month, when I was talking about the 2112 album and song. So I had this dream just as he left last May. And in this dream, it was just Tim and I in this big room. It was kind of a fancy room, I suppose. It reminded me of one of those rooms in the mansion of, what's that movie with the Illuminati symbolism and Tom Cruise? Eyes wide shut, right? And Tim was wearing this robe, and like one of those, like a ceremonial robe or something, and he was holding this wooden box with some etchings on it. He walked slowly, methodically forwards, and then stopped. In a deep voice, he said, "This is a sacrifice." And he opens up the box, and out flies this big, giant queen bee, flying towards me, and not in a friendly way. So, with him saying this is a sacrifice, and remembering how our relationship started out in a suggested violent way, instinctively I just grabbed a book that was on this table next to me, and I swung at the bee in self-defense. And I didn't see it hit the bee, but I looked down and there was a big blood splotch on the book. So when I woke up, I started to look up bee symbolism in dreams and whatnot. Nothing seemed to quite fit what I was reading. And I guess the most obvious connection would be the sacrifice is time, because him and I both worked these 7-day work weeks, 10-hour days on average, and when him leaving, I was going to have to pick up more hours. So the sacrifice could be time. I didn't know what to make of the blood splotch. I mean, he said this is a sacrifice. Was I the sacrifice? Was he sending a bee after me to get me? And I swung in self-defense? Was the bee the sacrifice? Obviously, the surface level interpretation would be time is the sacrifice. And if you think about this, Clockwork Lives is this graphic novel with the bee and the blood splotch connected with the Rush album Clockwork Angels, which is clearly a reference to time, even just looking at the album cover. The queen bee could have had a lot of symbolism too that I could explore later, but there is also the idea of a worker bee, and Tim and I were both worker bees. So yes, I am connecting this with the Clockwork Lives graphic novel, which I have not read. I only just found out about it last month. But I saw the cover and immediately thought of that dream. It's connected with Clockwork Angels, the word walk, the word clock is in there, and so is work, and of course, putting in a lot of hours at work. So I gotta look into the date of that dream and see if that's significant, somehow related to me finding the Rush 2112 and Clockwork Angels and whatnot. The date of the dream was May 29th. I texted my lady on the 30th. So, and this, speaking of sacrificing, like I said, was this a sacrifice of the queen? Him and I didn't agree to sacrifice the queen. I just saw him in a room and he opened up this box and then out flew this bee at me. If you think about a queen sacrifice, this is like chess terminology. A queen sacrifice is a move that sacrifices a queen, the most powerful piece, in return for some compensation, such as a tactical or positional advantage. I don't know, just thought I'd throw that out there. Something else I wanted to talk about that's probably unrelated, somehow related, is, remember I was talking about these alchemy symbols that replace the numbers on the clock? I don't know if Neil Peart was the one that chose to put those symbols there, if they're arranged in that order from him or an artist connected with Rush, or if that's some classical arrangement for alchemy. I don't know much about alchemy. I know those are alchemical symbols. So before I knew about Clockwork Angels, that's their final album. My original decode was about 2112, which is an album that supposedly saved their career. And I looked at the drum on the bass drum in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It had this clock. Little did I know it was the album cover for Clockwork Angels. Now, besides 9/12, like Neil Peart was born on September 12th, and besides how 9:12 p.m. is 21:12 on the clock, like the album 2112, I just looked at the hands on the clock. What symbols are they pointing to? We have, to the left, the hour hand is pointing to Neptune with the trident. And off to the right, it's pointing to this other symbol that I did not know of until recently what that was. So apparently, that's the alchemical symbol for anneal, if that's how you pronounce it, or annealing. And I guess just as a stretch, kind of funny thing to point out, we're talking about Neil Peart, and now this symbol is anneal. But something else I noticed, and this is kind of interesting to me. The anneal symbol is very close to the new archery symbol for Olympics, the 2024 Paris Olympics. The archery symbol looks a lot like the annealing symbol. So, if you don't know much about alchemy, which I don't, one of the first things that you might learn is that it has to do with turning lead into gold, or base metals into gold. Now you think about gold, the gold medal is the coveted prize at the Olympics. So I looked up the Olympics, archery, who won the gold medals. According to a quick search, if you look at the regular archery Olympic Games, Paris 2024, who took all the gold medals was South Korea. So I don't know what to say about that. I think when you find synchronicities that are strong, you should pay attention to details, and however arbitrary they seem, take note. So I'm going to keep an eye on South Korea. But also Ukraine. I pointed out Ukraine in my previous video about this magic square that I discovered in connection with the jet crash. The Ukrainian jet crash killed a certain amount of people. I'll leave a link in the description box, but doesn't Ukraine have this coat of arms or something connected with the trident? And the hands of this clock are pointing at the Neptune trident and a couple of minutes past the annealing symbol.